It's working on it. All right. I think it's live now on YouTube. Gloria, can you check? Mine keeps wanting to. Do you know what the YouTube channel is? Let me see. If you can't hear you. No, that's our meeting here.
Sorry about that. Yes, the streaming and the recording are both on, both live.
Okay. All right. In that case, I'm now going to let people in.
Oh, somebody has a giraffe.
That's wonderful.
Mm.
Hi, Jane.
Hi, Plune. Hi, Gloria.
Hey,
Hi,
Jane.
everyone.
Hi, Stacia. Hi, Jim. Hi, Sheila.
Hi, Plune. Hi, everyone.
Hi, Chris. Hi, Michelle. We're going to be hanging out for another couple of minutes. We have a lot of people signed up, so while people are signing on, feel free to talk to each other. You know, we don't have to sit here and stare at each other. So long as we don't talk about the topic at hand, we're good.
You talk about anything else. Yeah, and put your names and emails in the chat so people can find you later.
Yeah.
Oh, I could do that.
So I keep getting these emails that people are not getting the link emailed, which
Oh,
I don't know what that is.
I have two other Waylanders that are coming, so.
I'm just sending out links. Oh, wow. I didn't know how busy Rachel was.
We always appreciate her when she's gone.
Yeah.
We actually appreciate her when she's here too.
That's true.
There's my chat. Okay.
Welcome, everybody. Feel free to talk to each other. Put your information in the chat. As you know, we send it around.
Did I spell Needham History right? Needham History Center Museum. Yeah. Frequently don't.
And here's Patty.
Gotta let Patty in.
This feels like old home week. Is that because we're all getting to be superannuated? Is that it? This is the topic. Welcome, everyone. We're still letting people in,
Good.
so feel free to put your name in the chat and your email address for later and talk. It used to be that everybody was so relieved to talk, and now we're on Zoom meetings all the time, and we're like, oh no, I don't need to talk, thank you.
I think you got that right.
Stop me now. And one of the good things to do is if your name is not the right name on the list, you can change it by hovering over your three dots on the right top. People are still streaming in. Gloria, we'll give it one more minute. How's that sound?
Boone, you need background music.
Sorry. Oh, I need background music. Why don't you start humming?
Because they're all so quiet.
I know we're all being very polite and quiet. I think
If I
Well,
started
it's
singing, that
such-
would scare the audience away. We don't want that.
Gotta be the subject.
I'll say hello.
Okay, so I'm going to start with the introductory stuff. So Gloria, maybe you can admit people while I'm doing that.
Hang on,
Okay.
just, okay,
Yeah, if you get up the participants list.
yeah, I just closed it
Alright.
off, so now it's open again.
All right, great. Hello, everyone. My name is Pleun Boresius. I'm a member of the board of the Mass History Alliance and of the Conversations on the Commons team. I will be your host today in the sense that not only am I your Zoom host, but if you have any technical questions, I'm the person to ask, and I will, to the best of my abilities, try to resolve your issue. Welcome to Conversations on the Commons, which is a project of the Massachusetts History Alliance. Conversations on the Commons are just that, informal conversations, and you are invited to participate in the discussion, ask questions, and use the chat. This event is streamed live on YouTube, and those of you watching there are invited to comment and send questions, which we will monitor to the best of our ability, which may not be all that great today, that ability. Just to let you know. A reminder about upcoming Conversations on the Commons. In February, probably the second half of February, we will have a conversation on born digital archiving, born digital materials. And I am still looking for someone from a historical organization who that collects born digital materials. So if you know someone, please send me an email. My email is in the chat. In March, we will focus on exhibit planning, and we're going to do either one or two events focused on exhibit planning. And in April, we are going to have a conversation on public history in the public consciousness, and that one will have to do is basically public history in an election year. Maybe we should rename it. Before we start, here's some housekeeping. Once we start the conversation, please keep your microphone muted until you are called on. It basically lowers the background noise. This is meant to be an informal conversation. We invite you to turn on your video. Use the chat. We send it around to all the participants afterwards. Start by introducing yourself, put your name, email address, and town or organizations if you want to share those. Also comment, ask questions, share resources, or raise any tech issues during the conversation. Let us know you have something to say by raising your hand, which you can do in the participants list. If you are on the phone, just ask to break in. Make sure that your name is correct in the participants list. You can do this by hovering over your name in the list and then clicking more. If you're on your phone, just click participants and then click your name. If we get Zoom bombed, we'll immediately close the conversation and send you a link for a new one to start immediately. So look at your email if that happens. After today's conversation, please leave us with a survey response. The link is in the chat. For those of you following the live stream on the Commons site, there's a link to the survey in the Conversations archive. I'd like to thank Mass History Alliance's top sponsors, Mass Humanities, the State Historical Records Advisory Board, Mike Petoskey, and the Dorchester Historical Society. You can find all of our sponsors on the Commons and the MHA websites. The links to those are in the chat. We'd like you to invite to list. I would like to invite you to list your organization in the Commons directory, which is an up-and-coming article, and sponsor the Commons. Everything costs money, so if you can only spare $25, we'll gladly have it. Logistics coordinator, which is me, will drop some links in the chat, which are about our sponsors and contributing, etc. All right, I will do that in a minute. Our moderator today is Gloria Grice, who is another member of the Commons Committee. And Gloria has been the executive director of the Needham History Center and Museum since June 2002. Prior to Needham, she was Peabody Research Fellow at the Peabody Museum of Archaeology and Ethnology at Harvard, and collections manager for the Peabody's Archaeology and Human Osteology collections. She holds a PhD in anthropology, specializing in the archaeology of prehistoric Europe. Gloria is the author of several books and films on archaeology and local history, and of numerous articles and weekly posts on history, archaeology, and various other topics. She is an honorary fellow of the Massachusetts Historical Society and a board member of the Photographic Historical Society of New England. In Needham, she is currently a member of the Needham Historical Commission, the Local History District Study Committee, the Town Seal Review Committee, co-president of the Great Hall Performance Foundation, and an advisory trustee on the N.C. Wyeth Research Foundation and Library. And Gloria is going to take it from here and introduce today's event and do the poll. It's all yours, Gloria.
Thank you, Plune. Yikes. All right. Despite the fact that we are all going to live forever, sooner or later, our organizations must grapple with the issue of transition and succession. The replacement of an executive director or a board president is always accompanied by some degree of angst and institutional change. Executive successions, especially, are a chance to start fresh. They require the organization to take a hard look at its current state, at its aspirations for future programming, and at changes in its mission and focus. We are so excited today to discuss this with Kayla Coleman, recently appointed executive director of NEMA, and Susan Robertson, recently retired executive director of Gore Place, two panelists on opposite ends of the succession planning process. And also, just to comment, these are both very strong organizations with upward trajectories. So one of the things we'll talk about is, Susan handing off a strong organization and Kayla taking on a strong organization. So I think it's going to be extremely interesting conversation, and please prepare your questions and your own experiences, because we do want to hear from you as well. So now Plune is going to launch a poll. We would like little bit of information about who's out there, what kinds of organizations you're from, and whether or not you're in this planning process. So take a few minutes to fill this out. There's 2 questions, remember, so scroll down. Hey, Plune, let me know when you want to end the poll. We've got 90% participation so far. 3 of you are holding out on us. We know all, we see all. Okay. So interestingly, most of you come from historical societies or museums, small museums, historic houses, some from historical commissions, and a small number from educational organizations or governmental units. And looks like one person from a preservation organization, which is interesting. As far as succession planning, nobody claims to either have finished it or be in the middle of it. About half of you are just starting the process, and the other half are either just starting to consider it or have not gotten to that point in your institutional life. Okay, so with that information, we're going to go forward. Stop. Okay, we're going to go forward with our discussion. I'm going to introduce our first speaker, Susan Robertson. Susan Robertson was executive director of Gore Place for 37 years. She was the organization's longest serving director since Gore Place Society was founded in 1935. She focused on strategic planning, capital infrastructure, interpretive programs, and accessibility. Ms. Robertson was president of the board of New England Museum. Was that New England Museum Association? NEMA, yes. And received their Lifetime Achievement Award in 2020. She served the museum field by leading countless professional development initiatives for NEMA and as peer reviewer for the American Alliance of Museums Accreditation Commission. She also served on the board of the Waltham Chamber of Commerce and received the Chairman's Award in 2001 and 2003. Upon her retirement from Gore Place, Ms. Robertson was named Executive Director Emerita. And anyone who has been following Gore Place over the years has a pretty good sense of how their program and scope has expanded while Susan was director. And she told me she five capital campaigns. My God. Please welcome Susan Robertson.
Thank you very much. Succession. I've only actually been involved with 2 succession operations. One was the one when they hired me, and one was the one when we went and hired Gavin Cleespies just recently. The first one is so light years apart from the second one. The first one was done under a sense of urgency. The organization had had a longstanding director who had left. Then they hired a new director who's only stayed 11 and a half months. Then they hired another director who was fired after 2.5 months. So they were upset, they were anxious, and they wanted to solve their problem very fast. So they hired me right out of the staff roster at 9 o'clock at night. I didn't want the job. I didn't know how to be a director. I'd never been a director. But they told me that I was their choice and I would please at least take it for 6 months. Well, 37 and a half years later, I finally figured out I was leaving. It's a great organization, and I've enjoyed myself immensely. Now, succession. Given a sense of urgency is not a good way to hire a director. You make mistakes, and surprisingly, they didn't make a mistake with me. But the reason they didn't make a mistake with me is they gave me a great deal of help in the beginning. I had mentors from the board. I had mentors from the membership, people who said they would help me learn to be a director. And they did. The second succession planning at Gore Place, the one that has just resulted in Gavin becoming the ED, handled very differently. We knew 3 or 4 years out that I would retire. After all, I'd been there now for 30 years, and I wanted to retire. We also knew that we had the benefit of a long-range vision. We had accomplished a great deal. We had no deferred maintenance. We had built an infrastructure after, yes, 5 capital campaigns. We had all the ducks in a row. So going into the second succession plan, we had a lot going for us. We weren't in a hurry. We were ready. We could take our time. And that's a huge advantage to an organization. We knew that I would stay long enough to take them through accreditation, which I did. And that causes you, even if you don't care about being accredited, you at least can care about the process that goes on during accreditation, because it causes you to rethink your policies, your planning, your infrastructure, everything about it, and you move to a much more professional level. And that's part of Gore Place's success, that it moved to this professional level. So I took them through reaccreditation. That went fine. And part of that was to take another look at the strategic plan. I believe in strategic plans. I believe they need to be reviewed annually. So we were doing that regularly, and we certainly did that before we went into the succession planning. We got all our policies up to date. Everything was ready. I just had to finish the barns. COVID came and the barn campaign faltered, and the contractors faltered, and, not defaulted, but just faltered. Everything took more time during COVID, as we all know. But finally, I had said to them 2 years out, I will give you 1 year's notice. And I did. I gave them 1 year's notice a year ago, January. And we were ready. The board was ready. The board formed a small task force. The task force interviewed search firms, selected one. And then we had to wait in queue. Again, it was fortunate we had an option of lots of time, because we had to wait for the search firm consultant to assist us, since he was finishing up 2 large searches, and he wanted to get those over before he helped us. So time really counted. And then we interviewed the staff and finally got many applications and chose the top 6, whittled it down to the top 3, and finally the final 2. And now Gavin is a great choice for this organization. He will be a wonderful ED for the organization. As I look back over the process, I think things to note are as follows. I think communication is absolutely critical in the process. The staff got nervous. They had no reason to get nervous, but they're human beings. They got nervous. Change makes people nervous. So it's absolutely critical as you go into this that you keep your staff informed what you're doing. Even if it's just a weekly, hi, how are you? Everything is fine. We're here. We're still working away at this. Be patient. That sort of message. That's enough. The other thing to do, I think, is be very sure about what your vision for the organization is. I stayed out of their planning on purpose. I didn't want to influence them. And that was fine, because the staff and the board are very competent, and they could do their own visioning for what was going to be next. And finally, at the end, I was to leave in December, but I stuck around for a little bit longer than that because Gavin had asked me to, and we spent an arduous couple of weeks getting all the files in place, and oh my word, it goes on and on. I think you, at least I did, underestimate how much work there was to make the transition smooth. That's it.
Hey, thank you. Our second panelist is Kayla Coleman. Kayla is the new executive director of NEMA, following Dan Yeager, who was director for 13 years, around that long. Kayla Coleman is an art historian, curator, educator, writer, and public art advocate whose work is rooted in topics that include access, post-colonialism, gentrification, and the intersections of marginalizations. Since beginning her career, Kayla has held positions at the New York City Department of Cultural Affairs, the Studio Museum in Harlem, and the New York Historical Society. Passionate about human and civil rights, Kayla has worked in community organizing around racism, prison reform, housing rights, immigration, abortion rights, and voting rights. Since September 2023, Kayla has been the executive director of the New England Museum Association, where she applies her knowledge and experience to continue cultivating a more equitable and informed museum world. Please welcome Kayla Coleman.
Thank you, Gloria. Thank you, Plume. And it was great to hear about your process, Susan, because when I left my old position, that process was not the same. But I'll speak briefly on what it was like to step into this role at NEMA. I think I was very fortunate in that I wasn't stepping directly into someone else's position or shoes. There had been quite some time between the exit of Dan Yeager and me stepping into the role. And in that time, the board had did so much work in regards to revising the mission and values of NEMA and really doing work in regards to DEIJ, like diversity, equity, inclusion, and access, as well as, you know, racial equity and things of that nature. I know what my skill set is outside of administration. So whenever I'm considering a position or considering a role, I know what I do well and I know exactly what I bring. So I assume that if someone, like if an institution is interested in me, then they're interested in doing certain kind of work. I was very fortunate that NEMA is primed to begin doing this work in regarding racial equity and inclusion work and, you know, accessibility work. So that made sense to me. And I think from the moment I began my application process, and NEMA used a search firm, they use Arts Consulting Group. NEMA and their hiring committee was very clear on what they deemed to be important and the kind of values that they wanted in their next leader. And so it felt pretty seamless for me, the process, based on just all of that. They seemed to have saw what I was doing, the kind of trend in which my career had followed, and it made sense. I think when you're planning succession or you're even looking towards, as an individual, like when I'm looking at a position or considering making a move like that, it's always a strategy involved. Like I think about my skills and what I can bring, and if it's an organization has a vision that I can commit to and bring something of value to. So it isn't, and this is something that I used to tell my students when they were considering internships or considering even positions in the field. I would tell them, you are empowered as someone who is interested in a position or interested in getting in this kind of work or any particular role. And you aren't actually sitting in a position like, oh, I hope they see me and choose me. It's like, hey, this is a conversation. Does what I bring to the table work with what this organization is doing, or, you know, what they are envisioning for their future? Because when you are stepping into a role as a leader, you have to be forward thinking and you have to think about what the future of that organization or institution looks like. And in our field, so much of what the future looks like is based on funding, it's based on money. So you have to consider, for me, was like, can I actually support an entire geographic region in their professional development? Could I actually fund an organization in that way and see that money be used in a way that makes sense? I believe I could, which is why I'm here. But it was also just like, that's a big task. And I recognize like how huge that is. So I wanted to be honest with myself about what I could bring. And I think, I believe that I was. I know where my strengths lie, and I leaned on that. Forward thinking is the thing I believe that matters the most in succession planning. And when you are beginning that, 5 years is at the very least, but you should be thinking about also the legacy of your institution and what you actually want that institution to mean, not only in the present, but also in the future. And I think that's it for me.
Thank you so much. It's interesting because that is really it's really very much a strategic change of direction for, it is a change of direction for NEMA. It's not that they were not engaged in empowerment and inclusion. They've been a long time concerns, or they have for a long time programmed and worked with efforts to diversify the museum community. But this is really a very sharp turn of emphasis. Kayla's background obviously is much broader than just the museum world, and it brings this different dimension. We're going to start. I have some discussion questions, but I would rather start with your questions for Susan and Kayla. So please, the easiest way to see you is if you put the raised hand icon, you pop right to the front. But you can put a question in the chat if you prefer, and we will monitor those. So please feel free and encouraged to comment on what you've heard or discuss the trajectory of your own organizations. So any questions to start? Someone wants to start. Come on. Okay. Then one thing I was gonna wanted to comment on is Susan raised the issue or discussed for that Gore Place had a plan. They did not go into this the second time as an emergency situation where they just had to do something fast. This time they went into it with really several years of buildup, long-term strategic planning, pretty, a lot of capital fundraising that, established a strong foundation for the programs they were planning on. So they were able to do this in a very strategic way. But as she mentioned, her first time was nothing like that. They had cycled through 4 new EDs, 3-4 new EDs in a very short period of time, and really just needed somebody on the ground, and they lucked out. They made the right choice, whether or not they knew it at the time. They made the right choice for the organization. So this is a process that can be joyful if the organization is strong, and painful if it's not. And naming no names, but we all know organizations that have had to make this change in order to survive, and not just because a previous incompetent administration. It's not because of incompetence necessarily, but just because the situation has changed so drastically that something needs to be done. It becomes a march or die situation. So have any of you out there been in that situation where your institution has had to make this kind of change for the future survival of the organization? And that question is especially directed to people who might be the first paid staff, the first ED of your organization, and who made that transition from an all-volunteer organization to an organization with professional staff, even if you are the only professional staff. And what might be the thinking behind that change? Does anybody want to offer up their experience in this? You guys have to talk. This will be a very long conversation, a very short conversation if you don't. Gretchen, yeah. There
Thank
you
you.
go.
Okay,
Yeah.
I just had to get the mute off. Thank you very much. I'm president of the Whaling Historical Society, and we are way, way before everything that you're talking about in that we have one half-time paid staff, our curator, who we couldn't live without. And we are contemplating the next step of having a executive director, museum director, something along those lines. And I really think that Kayla's comments about forward thinking has given me lots of pause to think about that and what that means for us. And I think we've been at this stage where we're all 75 and up, and we're the volunteers. I mean, it's really hard to get young people to volunteer in a small organization. So that's what we're trying to do, but don't want to hire somebody just because we can't do volunteering. So we have to get somebody who's, energetic, who can instill that volunteerism in the membership or the outside community to bring people. And I really appreciate that the comments that have been made by Susan and Kayla, and I think we're at a step before, because we don't have, if we do, it's going to be the first time if we do go that route. So of course we would take any advice that anybody wants to give, because we don't want to go through having one person and then not failing, and we have to raise the money for this, etc.
Gretchen, has the board started thinking about what that process should look like yet, or what that potential ED should look like yet?
Yeah,
Or is it still very theoretical?
We have a long range planning, strategic planning committee.
Mhm.
And we have a recently retired museum director on that board. And we actually today decided that we really need to have a job description and have a better, we have vision and goals, we have a mission, all that sort of thing. And we have to put some objectives into that for the board. The board's been hearing all of this all along. So I think that yes and no to your question. Right. We're thinking about it, and people are a little bit nervous about the expense. But I think we have to do it. We've got to do something one way or the other. We've had a hard time attracting leadership. So
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, I think we find, especially in small organizations, that without somebody who's minding the store, volunteers are great. They have their job and they do it. And the board does their job. But if they're sort of after at some point, I think you really need somebody, who's really sort of watching every day. And that's the transition a lot of organizations have had to make. Got a couple questions. I'll take them in order. Plume would like Kayla and Susan to repeat the names of their search firms, because people were interested in that.
NEMA used Arts Consulting Group, ACG. They have representatives all over the country, but the one that's here in our area, her name is Wyona Lynch and McWhite, and she's amazing. And if I will find her email and drop it if you would like to speak to her.
Yeah, that would be great if you could put that in the chat.
Gore Place used Museum Search and Reference. They're out of New Hampshire. And they were great.
Okay, thank you. Susan, I see your hand up, and I will get to you in a second. You can put your hand down, Dolly. I will get to you in a second. Betsy McKee asked, how does this apply to small all-volunteer historical societies? Do either of you have a comment on that?
Yes,
Obviously, yeah.
I do. Okay, so we're going to talk about, let's say, Historical Society A. I would assume, hopefully, that they are at least a nonprofit that is getting funding, because investment in new leadership or something of that nature, it does cost money if you want to go the executive search route. If money and funding is an issue, then that means that what good thing to do is to lean into your network. Lean into like this is a network, this is a community. We're all gathered here today, just like we said, hey, we know these two firms, like NEMA also has a job board, or like we know of other other things like that, ways in which people can find what they're looking for that may not be at that level of investment. Because search firms can cost anywhere from 20 to 60, 70K easily. I think also, if in regards, and I think it was Gretchen who said something that triggered this in my mind. You're thinking about Historical Society, you want people to be involved, you want to skew like younger to where like there are people who are willing to make that like time investment. Like me, I'm young. I know I'm young, and it's like I know that like I can easily envision 10 years in a row because I'm young. And so like I think that is like something that may not have been a thing that someone would write on paper, like, oh, we want someone who's going to be younger, but you do want someone who's willing to make that time investment into a place and take it to whatever place we have envisioned it for in the future. So that is something that I also considered when I took my role. Also, how does this apply to historical societies? How do you want the society to engage in the world, like, or in your state? Like, do you just envision yourself being like a local repository of history and things to explore? Do you want to be in conversation with the rest of the history of your state? Do you want to be in conversation with the rest of the history of your region? Are you open to different interpretations? All of those things matter, and all of those things impact who your new leader will be, the kind of funding you will have. Well, how do you position yourself in the future? So those are all some things that I consider that should be thought about when doing work like this.
Kayla's absolutely correct on everything she said. I like to add something. When I was first involved with NEMA, I came on as a PAG chair with Ken Torino. They didn't want to sign me alone because they didn't know anything about me. So they assigned me to Ken. And pretty soon, Ken recognized I could hold my own. So he went and did other things, and I stayed on as the small museum PAG chair. And one of the things I recognized in talking to people was how needy small museums were, not because they couldn't do something, they just didn't know what direction to go in. So I formed something called the Roadshow. I affectionately called it the Roadshow. And I would find a place in New England where there were lots of small sites, which is easy to do in New England. 65% of NEMA's members are small museums. And I would send out a message to all those organizations in that area that I was going to come with a coffee pot and a box of donuts. I can't believe I did that, but I did. I don't eat donuts now at all, but anyway. And I would arrive on somebody's doorstep, and they would all come in, no cost. NEMA didn't charge them anything. And I went on my own nickel. And we would sit around for an hour, 2 hours, 3 hours, 4 hours, whatever it was. And I had an agenda I went through. I went through Museums 101 with them. And 101, and the reason I'm talking about this is not that you need that, but it's all about, as Kayla said, vision, and Gloria said vision. And it's all about planning. So if I were you and you didn't have a lot of money for an expensive search firm and you wanted to think about visioning, you need to sit down and really think about visioning, not just create a strategic plan and say, okay, I'm done. You have to think about what are your resources? And I'm not talking just financial. What's your land like? What's your building like? What's your collection like? What are your stories like? What is your history per se like? What would be interesting to the general public? It's probably not that you have the finest collection of Boston-made chairs in the world. It's probably the stories of the people who made those chairs or the people who lived in your community. So if you're going to go into succession planning, why not think about planning for your board? What would interest your board or members of the community to become members of your board? So that's why I would take you back to look at your resources. What is it that makes you unique and that the public can latch onto because it interests them? They want to be told the stories. One of the best things that Gore Place ever did was to switch its newsletter. It used to have a lovely newsletter. It has had for years, comes out twice a year. And it was mostly a show and tell newsletter. Okay, we're going to do these programs. These are the staff we've hired. This is the latest thing we've acquired, all that sort of stuff. Well, you read that in about 15 minutes and you're done. And it goes in the circular file. So we switched it up. We said to the staff, and we challenged the staff, what are the stories you can tell about early Waltham? What are the stories you can tell about the Gores, if there are any? And we don't know all that much about the Gores. What are the stories? Are there scandals that you could put in the newsletter? Those people love scandals. It's sad, but they do. And so our newsletter switched to be archival stories. Based upon some research the staff did, they would pick a character and ferret it out and put that up. And instantly, our new newsletter, attracted attention. No longer did it go in the circular file. Now it sat on the coffee table so they could discuss the story among themselves or with their friends. And that interested people in Gore Place that had never been interested at all. We were considered Boston's greatest hidden treasure. Nobody came to see us. It was tough. We thought we were great, but they didn't understand that. And this kind of planning enabled us to attract more energetic, younger board members. So you see, we didn't go after an ED. They didn't really need one, but they weren't interested in that. They needed to grow their board with a few energetic younger people. And why would they want to come and play with a bunch of 75-year-olds? Well, they wouldn't, except the stories that the 75-year-olds can tell, or the stories that the staff can ferret out that are so engaging because you're all history buffs. You like history and you want to know about people who lived a long time ago. So that's what I would do. I wouldn't necessarily worry about, I can't afford a search firm. And Kayla's right. There are lots of other ways to attract people besides a search firm. There's higher culture, there's NEMA jobs, there's all kinds of things you could use. There's word of mouth. There's your local chamber, all kinds of people. But think about your resources, what you have to offer, and what are the stories you can tell.
Every organization, regardless of their size, can and should plan forward. And ultimately, that is the key to any form of growth and succession. We can't afford a consultant or search firm, but in a lot of ways, the best consultants are going to just drag that planning process out of you. You do have the capacity to start that yourself and get yourself on that path when you are planning any sort of growth. And to Susan's point, we started putting stories in our newsletter. Our email goes out every Thursday, every week, and we started putting in little stories to make people read it. The stories have gotten, I'm both happy and sorry to say they're roughly now 600 to 800 words. So, 2 pages long, which, is a lot of work every week to get one out. But our newsletter has gone from about 400 subscribers to 1,500 subscribers in 3 years. People they'll tell you, I'm not really a history buff. They want to know about their community. They want to know these quirky things, like something about we have a house designed by Frank Lloyd Wright in Needham. Who knew? He was young, he was making stock designs for Ladies Home Journal, but it's still Frank Lloyd Wright. So there's a story. So you find these ways to engage your community and create your importance in the community, and those resources will start to come to you. You'll start getting a better idea of who's interested, why they're interested, and what you can do to keep them engaged. Betsy Hanola has a comment.
Yes, I just wanted to add that when Gretchen Schuler asked her question, that most of the historical societies I have interacted with in North Central Worcester County are in the position of just being all volunteer. So this kind of thinking about hiring a full-time person is like way down the road. Unfortunately, the path to way down the road might end with some of these historical societies having to close. So that's what we've been working with in Westminster. I mean, I've been the curator since 1984, but a volunteer through all my full-time jobs. I just volunteered. And so now, since I'm retired, I do it still as a volunteer, many, many hours. But there are most of the historical societies in North Central Worcester County are all volunteer. So I do worry about succession planning, which is why I'm at this particular session. Having been a director of the Fitchburg Historical Society in my past, it's a huge deal to have one person who's really responsible for handling everything. And it's scary to think that, some organizations do end up having to close because all their 75-year-olds die and there's nobody left to manage the organization. And as she said, and as most of us know, it's so hard to get young people involved. So it was COVID that really almost did us in. I mean, it's almost hard to believe that during that time, it was really dangerous to meet with other people. And when you can't meet face to face with anybody, it was tough, but we survived. And now, we're trying to get the young people involved. I mean, I agree with everything that's been said. I know with Susan's idea, we had cut down from 4 newsletters a year to 3 because we just ended up having only 2 or 3 people doing everything during COVID. So I like the idea that, we specialize in having a feature article every time in our newsletter. But I think that I like the idea that the feature article, I always want to be interesting, right? But maybe cutting back on the length of the ideas of what we've done. This is what your historical society has been doing, or this is what your historical society is going to do this next season. Cutting back maybe on some of that, just putting a lot of pictures in with just ideas, notes about what happened, and not articles, and then featuring the interesting article and maybe doing it just. I mean, it did help during COVID when we didn't actually print our newsletter because the funding was cut because we couldn't meet with anybody. I'd have programs. So then we decided, well, we'll do all on the internet, digital newsletters. but we're still at that point in Westminster where we have older people who are not on the internet all the time. So you kind of still have to do that printing process if you want to connect with the really elderly, who are the ones who are really interested. So I can't envision having even a part-time executive director, even in my lifetime, probably. But I know that when I die, I am certainly going to leave money for the Historical Society, because we started a fund for operations of the Historical Society, with the hope that that will provide the funding to provide a part-time position after all these old timers are gone. It's a constant struggle for the small historical societies, because actually it's a little different from a museum. And actually, when I think about it, it's really more of a plus if you're a historical society than a museum, because a lot of people think of a museum as, a specific image of a museum, whereas a historical society, we're doing lots of things. We have, programming, and we have things to see, and maybe temporary exhibits, but we're not the same thing all the time. We're always changing with whatever collections we have now gotten and that kind of thing. So anyway, I'm just corroborating everything that's been said, that small historical societies are, as Gretchen said, we're so early in the stage that we need to learn and do a lot more to get to the point where we can actually hire somebody to take over when we're gone.
Thank you. The variety of your collections and activities is a strength that you should lean into. And, and this goes back to planning, and it goes back to the board. You can't sort of surrender to that sense that, young people aren't interested, or we have a limit of what we can offer, because, that's the downward trajectory. You always have to look forward to what is it we can do? What do we do best? What can we do within our community? And the board really has to create a plan to move forward. Kayla or Susan, have any comments on this as well?
Susan has had her hand up for quite some time.
Yes, she
and I really
has.
want to hear what she has to say.
Okay. Susan, go ahead. Thank you for waiting.
Very much. I'm Susan Kurtzman. I am the president of the Truro Historical Society in Truro on Cape Cod. I also was the director and also the curator of the Truro Historical Society for several years. I've been on the board for 20 years. I have to tell you that one of the things that we did after going through 2 directors in 2 years is rethink what the director's role was in a different way. And we got very creative about it. I have a 20-year advertising and marketing background as well. And I said, what would we do if we didn't have a director? But we split this job into what these job components are, and find people who might be interested in doing parts of these jobs. So the board agreed to actually have a look at what were the maybe 2 different areas. And we found that there was people person area and tech area. And as tech gets more involved, that really is something that has been crucial to our very small Truro Historical Society, which is located in the Cape Cod National Seashore, right by the lighthouse. We get thousands of visitors. We're all volunteer organization, but we have a very active board. Then we started looking at, and this from my marketing background, I think helped a bit, how do we broaden our board to involve more local people and more younger local people who are busy with raising families and doing whatever that they do and working. I'm 75 and a half, so I've done all of that already and had a couple of careers. But we looked at how we could approach our Chamber of Commerce, our Council on Aging, our schools, our businesses. I started going to dinners with the Chamber of Commerce, making a pitch for, we are your ambassadors. We are the people that are telling the story of Truro. We are the people that say, here's where you go to lunch. Here's where you need to see next. Well, this is what you should stay and which beach you should go to. And by the way, come into the museum and have a look at what we've got about the history. It's a much bigger story than just, what we've got in our collection. It really means you have to broaden out to the community and involve the community more. We have recently gotten and kept for 3 years one person who is our technical manager, and now we've got another person who is basically our museum manager, and we don't have a director. We decided that role, because we're an all volunteer organization, doesn't match with what we do. So I think thinking a little creatively about how to approach the problems and find maybe a different type of solution that works for your particular organization, wherever you are located. And I wholly support all of the newsletters online, in the mail, any way that you can get the message out to your volunteers, to potential volunteers, to your members, to potential members. This year we instituted corporate membership. And I went and spoke with businesses and said, how would you like to have like free family tickets and be a sponsor and your logo up on each one of the things that you want to sponsor in our events? And we have never done that before. And we've already gotten a half a dozen large sponsors, people that are taking memberships at over $500 per business, to jump in and go, oh yeah, I want to have my logo right there on the screen when you do your presentation. So there's a lot of different interesting ways that you can approach it. And succession is a very difficult thing when, younger people are, absorbed in you looking for volunteers. So, we've approached the schools too and sent things home to parents. I don't want to take up too much time, but I really appreciate all of the comments that have been made and all of the ideas. We look to ASLH also to hire people, or we go out to the colleges and try and see if we can get some, people to volunteer. So there's a lot of different additional approaches, but I don't want to take up too much time. It's basically
Your board, Susan's right. Your board is a huge resource. They have skills, and they have skills that are probably not historian skills. And my archivist complains about this all the time. We get these people on the board and she'll say, but they're not, they don't know anything about history. So they don't need to know about history. I need to know about history. You need to know about history. I don't want them looking over my shoulder as historians. I want them raising money, deploying one of them is an IT director for one of the hospitals. I need him to do our IT stuff. I need the lawyer on the board to, oversee some of our, you need their skills, and some of these skills, as Susan said, can essentially be things an ED would do. So succession is not just the hiring or not hiring of an ED, it's also creating a board that has both the commitment and the skills to move you forward. Jim, I see your hand. It's got a couple quick comments in the chat. Stacia Kaplanson mentions all volunteer organizations need to think about board succession, even if they cannot afford to hire a paid staff. You don't want to lose the knowledge, organizational and historical, when someone goes off the board. Clune mentions that all organizations with aging boards and members need to be very engaged in planning the future and board succession. So we're reinforcing that. I'm reminded of Historic Northampton, which hired 2 people to share the role of ED. So sometimes that's, fragmenting the job between the board, fragmenting the job between additional people. Heidi Vaughn has a question, and then I'll get to Jim. Heidi wants to know, what role should the existing ED play in succession planning?
I
Well,
did succession planning. Go ahead.
I know what I stayed out of their way because I figured they had a new vision. and I didn't want to influence them. They'd already known me for 35 years. So I truly stayed out of their way unless they came and asked me what I thought.
But you did do the handoff too, which is
Oh, totally.
important
God.
for the new ED. Yeah.
Oh, yes, I turned over all my archival material. I walked him through all kinds of things. We discussed issues. I made sure I never tried to influence him. It's his job, his thinking. That's the critical part for me.
Kayla.
The succession planning that I did when I left the org I was running in Raleigh was a co-directorship in which, and they were very fortunate because I worked in a very like collaborative way in which I had kept my staff very engaged. And so the co-directorship that I had set up was two of my staff members stepping up into that role. And the transition was very smooth in that. And like, I was fortunate that that was something that they were interested in. And they were aligned with some of the things that I had got hired for, which was one of the things that that org wanted to do was increase BIPOC participation. I was the first person of color to ever run that space. And with that came, a lot. Representation matters. So in a year, I had increased BIPOC engagement by 57%. But I also was, I knew that I was the only person of color on the staff. So I'm creating a succession plan that was going to be stepped in by two white people. And I was like, what you should be considering is community partnerships that can help elevate some of the foundation that I've put that has made this space a little more inclusive for people of color. And I was like, I have a lot going on, but I set up some meetings for them. And I was like, there was going to be a time where I have to stay out of this. So I was like, run with it and call me if you need me. But this is something that if you want the co-directorship, you're going to have to consider this too. And then there was something else that I wanted to make a comment on. I think it was something that Betsy had said, and someone else had said something similar in regards to succession planning. And yes, it's the board and planning for what your new board will look like or how people will step into these roles. But, and this was something that I had never considered until I built Studio Museum's archive. And when you're working with an archive, you're literally engaging with history. But there were papers that I was working with, and there was a woman who had helped found that institution. And she had said to me, I had always wanted Studio Museum to take my papers and, actually invest in the archive. I realized that I'm just one person and I can do so much and I'm aging. And she was like, I'm also an artist. So one of the things that she had did for posterity and keeping some of this history alive was that I wouldn't call it a succession, but I would call it a kind of, it was a platform to a different kind of succession in which in her will, she had bequeathed her papers different places. And with the idea that it didn't matter how it happened in the future or when it actually came to be, but that there would be someone who would be engaged in this information and engaged in the archive. And she also left funding for whomever that person would be. She didn't know who the person would be. She was like, there's going to be a time in which I'm no longer here. I don't know what that's going to look like, but I do know this is valuable. So her succession planning looked a little different. And interestingly enough, she recently passed and I was the person that she left some papers to. I haven't worked at Studio Museum for almost a decade, but I was one of the people she left papers to. And I was like, I built this archive. So now I'm kind of re-engaged in a way. And I was like, unfortunately, that's something that I did. I'm a historian. So yes, of course, I'm interested and I'm willing to lend my expertise, but I was like, I think this is something that you should bring in a different historian for, someone younger, like someone who was engaged. And one of the things that she left was also access to universities. And I think that's something that historic societies should think about. Not saying that I think that, oh, I want them to end and I don't want anyone to run them. That's not at all. Historic societies are very, very important. But sometimes making a partnership with an institution that does have those finances and have that human capital and people who are interested and willing to work in that way will drive your mission forward and will give you that succession that you didn't have access to or couldn't visualize in the time that you were doing the work.
Thank you. Jim Beecham, where'd you go? Has been waiting patiently. Did he disappear? Jim, you still with us? No, if he comes back, we'll grab him. Yeah, and I think this goes back again to the board. In a smaller organization, the ED is going to have some participation in this process because they're the one with the knowledge of what the job looks like on the ground. But the board is the part of the organization that's going to carry this forward when the ED is gone. So it can't be, me, I'm retiring, I tell the board what they should do, because I'll be gone and I won't be doing it. And the board has to have that commitment and that buy-in to keep it going. So it really is, your job as ED is to help with the resources, to help move, to help with advice, to show the person around and get them situated. But it's really the board that that is going to carry this forward. So the board needs that commitment to the future of the organization, that commitment to the organization's forward progress. Plune says she can't raise her hand, but she has a remark. Go ahead.
Yeah, sorry, I can't. As host, it won't let me raise my hand.
Oh.
Well, so I'm hearing something, especially from Kayla just now, that is actually creating a little space in my head, because as president of Mass History Alliance, and just because I, former president, and also because it's something that I'm very concerned with, the question of aging all volunteer organizations, not knowing where to go, also locally here in Plainfield, it is really immediate and also very important to me, because those organizations are carrying an enormous amount of knowledge and materials. And so the question is, where is that going to go? How are we going to make that step from being all volunteer, having a difficulty finding leadership, to hiring an ED? And I'm beginning to hear some questions about, is hiring specifically an ED, an executive director, is that the model that we need to go after? Is that, and so one question is, what do organizations that have successfully changed themselves in order to survive or thrive, what does that look like? And I think Kayla was just saying one way in which that might look is to share one's archive with someone else, so that the archive does not become the central reason of being for an organization anymore, or the one thing that an organization has to sit on, like an egg, always has to sit on and has to take care of. And much as I hate to consider that, and much as I remember when I first came to the Mass History Conference, I don't know how many hundreds of years ago, having a keynote speaker suggest that we better all give up our archives and give the best stuff to one organization and ditch the rest into the pond, which was a rather eye-opening comment for a keynote speaker, who shall remain nameless. um, there is something to be said for coming up with a different plan. Like for saying, okay, we need to learn from the fact that there are no young people coming here, that we need to do something, plan what's going to happen and how that might not lead to our demise, or at least not to lead to the demise of those aspects of the culture and heritage of our town or region that we are in charge of. So that was a very wordy and long-winded way of trying to say something, but that's because I'm trying to grope towards something that's positive and not negative. Does that make any sense?
Yes, it does, if I can talk.
That was Betsy.
Yeah, Betsy?
Yeah, because so I am of Finnish heritage, and there were in the early 1900s lots of Finnish organizations. And so I was part of a group. Westminster, the North Central Massachusetts, had the second largest concentration of Finnish immigrants in the country. The first is Michigan. So anyway, I was part of a group about 10 years ago that got together from several different Finnish organizations to talk about what is going to happen with all the Finnish collections. And one of the things we, in the group, there were about 25 of us, we had to go back to our organizations and look and see what the dissolution clause was in our incorporation papers. And if you haven't done that, you need to do it, because the dissolution clause, in many say you have to have, number one, if the corporation is going to close, you have to have a meeting. And for many churches, there were a lot of Finnish churches then at that time too, the clause in their incorporation papers, there weren't enough people left at the end to even vote to say what's going to happen to their collections. So for example, in Westminster, the Historical Society was formed in 1921, and it says in our dissolution clause, which incorporation papers require, it says all our collections would go to the town of Westminster. Well, if everyone dies and we don't have any young people, well, thank God we are getting young people now, which is a blessing. But imagine, what if the town of Westminster says, we don't want the collections? Because right now we have 3 selectmen who are awful, and they don't want to preserve anything. So it's a scary thing. Now, this is legal stuff. So you have to check your incorporation papers. Where are your papers going to go if your organization dissolves? It's really, I think you use the word plan of critical. It's imminent in some cases and critical. So that's why I'm so involved in wanting to build our boards so that we can get young people who will maintain this interest in and sharing of the history, which is so important to a lot of people, but it's the communication that's so important. So anyway, that's just my caution to check your dissolution clause in your incorporation papers to make sure that, number one, you're prepared for it. It all involves planning.
Yeah, I think it's easy to say that young people aren't interested. What we have to do is figure out why they're not interested in what we're doing, if that's the case, and how to get them interested, because, obviously you need not only a succession of executive and a succession of board, you need a succession of membership. You need people to continually, refresh your membership. You need new members as you go forward. Because otherwise, your organization will just, once that failure of membership starts, it can happen very, very quickly. And you sort of have to be ahead of it. You can't say, we're losing, we lost 25% of our members in the last 2 years. What do we do now? By then it's probably almost too late, so you do have to have all these things in your forward planning. But alliances with other groups is a possibility. That might be, pooling your resources and pooling your collections. If you have, a similar a similar mission. Either a cultural one like the Finnish organizations or a regional one. If you've got, two small museums in your tiny town, maybe you really need to join forces rather than, compete for donors. Or in your region, if it's a small, less densely populated part of the state, and you have, a bunch of some of these, towns with 3-digit populations, maybe you group together, pool your resources, pool your audience, and maximize that synergy to create some strength. Any other questions or comments? We've got a couple minutes left. Sheila.
Have a good day, Mary Ann. Good. Yes, hi. I'm trying to get the video on. There we go.
There you go.
Thank you. I'm representing a partnership. UMass Lowell and Lowell National Historical Park together run, and I direct the Tsongas Industrial History Center in Lowell. And I've been director since 2010. I've been here at the Tsongas Center since 1992. If we just focus on the past 13 plus years, I've accumulated an awful lot of paper documents and plenty of digital files that, over the coming year, I kind of need to think about how to and what to share with my successor, sometime in the not too distant future. So I'd appreciate hearing from others as to exactly some details of how that pass off happens, how that sharing of institutional knowledge, maybe of some content knowledge, procedural knowledge, or anything else actually happens. Is it oral? Is it papers you leave behind? Is it digital files that are in a shared drive, or something other than that? Thank you.
For all of the above.
It's all of the above for us. The digital files were all put in a shared drive for the new executive director. The paper files are in, file folders in file cabinets. So it's all of it.
Was it hard to do the thinning?
We didn't attempt to do for the paper files, it wasn't too difficult. For the digital files, I mean, it's 6 trilobytes or something. It's ginormous, and we have not attempted to do that. And he didn't ask us to do that. I think he wants a chance to see it all, and then perhaps someone would be brought in to help do that. At least find out what to do with the duplicates, that sort of thing.
Thank you.
Both Kay Gardner-Westcott and Betsy McKee point out that the Pioneer Valley History Network is a very active organization in Western Massachusetts, and that is a bunch of historical societies working together, and they have been very strong advocates for history in the region. They have been very strong representers of history in the region. That partnership, although it keeps organizations to get, the organizations stay separate, but they work together to maximize those strengths. Providence, are you raising your hand? Nope. Coming in and out of your picture. Okay, anybody else have comments or questions? We've got a few more minutes. Is anybody, I'm curious, anybody here on the call a first time, or not a first time, the first ED of your organization? Has anybody on the call been the person to sort of move from an all-volunteer organization to an organization with staff, professional staff, even if you're only part-time or you're the only one on your staff? Just me? For us, it was very much a strategic move. The board had realized that the part-time model was no longer working for us. We lost a great deal of membership in a short period of time. And so they hired a consultant who basically took them out for the weekend and raked them over the coals. You know, what is it you're thinking? What is it you want? What are you going to commit to get there? And they made an excellent strategic plan. And one of the results was, if you want people to pay attention to your organization, you're going to have somebody who spends their days creating, you know, getting people's attention. And finally, they came to the realization that, you know, an all-volunteer board was not going to have the time to make that commitment. And they did hire an ED, which happened to be me. You know, I've only got one other half-time. We still have a very tiny staff. It's me and one of my collections managers half-time. My archivist is a volunteer, but it still gives us enough focus to free the board up to do the other kinds of planning that we need for the resources that we need. And also just somebody whose, you know, daily job is to peck away at the community. We're doing this, we're doing that. You know, please join us for this. How can we do that? You know, that kind of constant attention that you sometimes need to engage in when your organization hadn't been one that had much attention. Does anybody else have any questions or comments? We are down to our last few minutes. Betsy, is that a hand up? Yeah.
I lost that raise hand spot.
Okay. If I could just see your hand at the edge of
I know, I was trying. It was down there somewhere. So I just put in the chat, but we've tried hard not to have only one person know how to do any one thing. Like when our webmaster left, we were okay because we had somebody else who knew how to design and maintain a website. And we now make sure that more than one person knows how to get into the website and update it. And we also have this saying, you know, if we get hit by a bus tomorrow, you know, fill in the blanks. Does somebody else know how to call the alarm company, or who does our insurance? Who's our insurance agent and all that kind of stuff? So don't assume everybody knows everything, nor should everybody know everything, but more than one person should know each task.
And there should be some place where it's documented. You know,
yes.
Just like your household finances, you know, you can't keep it all in your head. It has to be shared. It has to be written down. People need to be able to find those resources if something happens. You know, something happens to you, something happens to the organization. You need to be able to find those resources. Okay, anybody else? Plum.
I wanted to wish Susan all the best in her retirement, and a really good sense of all the successes she had at Gore Place. And I want to wish Kayla all the best at NEMA, and we will support you in whatever way we can, certainly here at the Mass History Alliance, and we're welcoming you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, everybody, for joining our chat today. Thank you for your comments and consideration. The chat will be sent out, so you will have a record of the comments, or the comments that were placed in the chat, people's addresses, and any other information that was posted. There will be information also posted about upcoming programs. You'll be getting that in the emails, in your emails. Sponsorship information, contributions, as Bloom pointed out. We do this, you know, we do this frugally, and we do this without cost to you, so we can include as many people as possible to get as wide a field of participation, involvement, conversation as we can. But, you know, it does cost some money. So if your organization is able to contribute, if you do have some resources, become a member. It, you know, it doesn't need to be a lot of money. Every little bit helps. And then you will also get an evaluation form after this conversation.
In the chat. Yeah, it's also in the chat.
Yeah, that's also in the chat. Yeah, so please, we welcome your comments. If you have ideas of what you would like to see for future programs. You know, please let us know that as well. That's important to us. We want to offer programs that are important to the community, and you are our community. So, you know, please feel free to make suggestions as well. Thanks again to our sponsors. Thanks again to you. Thank you so much to Susan and Kayla for being willing to present to us, to talk to us about their experiences, and to talk to us, you know, to help us understand the situation going forward and offering their advice. They both of their organizations are extremely fortunate to have had their participation and their leadership. So thank you, everybody. There's keep an eye out for our February chat on Born Digital Archives.
Tell me about some organization I can rope into.
Yes, tell us about some organization that has Born Digital resources. Most of us are sort of scan at need. So,
well, yeah, but it's very,
or we have
hard
things like
because-
photos that we don't know what to do with yet.
Well, there's that whole, how we talked about collecting the 20th century for a long time, right?
Yeah.
And so that was like, well, what are we going to do with all these photographs and all that? And now it's like, okay, now we don't have too many letters. We have no letters. What are we going to do now? So see you
Everything's
all
on
next
flash
time.
drives. What do we do with them? All right. Thank you, everybody.
Susan. Thank you, Kayla. See you next time.
Okay. Bye-bye.
And thank you, Gloria.
My pleasure. It was fun.